6 months after we buried my husband, I saw him, not as a memory, not as a dream, but standing, alive, at the farmer's market. Same jacket I had folded 100 times. Same slow, deliberate walk, the one that always made me worry about his left knee. And that tiny scar by his ear, the one I used to touch when I kissed him goodnight. For a moment, my mind refused to accept it. It's grief playing tricks, I told myself. But then, he laughed. That laugh, clear as day. The one that used to fill our kitchen, the one that could make any bad morning feel bearable. My hands went cold, clutching the tomatoes as if they could anchor me to reality. My heart pounded like it wanted to escape my chest. And before I could think, pray, or breathe, I was already moving toward him. Thank you for watching this far. It means more than you know. And before we go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I like to picture real faces and real homes when sharing something this heavy. My name is Mary. I live in Ohio. I've never sought attention. I'm the kind of woman who keeps her head down and her hands busy. But that morning, at that market, my quiet life ended. I followed him, not because I was brave, but because my heart demanded proof. Proof that my eyes weren't lying. Proof that the last 6 months of grief hadn't been meaningless. I stayed a few steps behind, weaving through crowds and stalls, pretending to examine apples and bread. Every movement, every turn he made, I memorized the slope of his shoulders, the subtle shake of his head when someone blocked his path, the way his hands moved with confidence, quietly folding bills or tucking change into his pocket. And then fear hit me. Not the fear of losing him, I had already done that, but the fear of what it would mean. If he had truly been alive all this time, the familiar smells of corn and fried dough, the chatter of vendors, the weight of my purse strap pressing into my shoulder, it all became a strange backdrop for the impossible. I tried to reason with myself. Mary, you buried him. You signed the papers. You cried until your throat was raw. But reality kept proving me wrong. Every small detail, perfectly aligned with the man I had loved for decades, was marching in front of me like a cruel joke. I followed him as he moved toward the market's edge, away from the warm, bustling stalls, into streets I barely recognized. Exhaust fumes replaced the scent of bread, and the world suddenly felt colder. I felt completely alone. He stopped at a small house, pale with a slightly leaning fence. The door opened before he even knocked. A woman stepped out, rushing into his arms, wrapping herself around him without hesitation. A little boy ran to him, shouting, "Daddy." And that was the moment my chest cracked open. I realized I was not seeing a ghost. I was seeing a man who had been alive all along. I pressed my hand to the tree I was hiding behind to stay upright. My knees shook. My heart ached. And then the realization sank in. My mourning, my grief, my tears, they had been part of a life carefully separated from mine. I drove home, my hands trembling around the steering wheel. My world felt shattered and rearranged. I stared at my tomatoes as if they could anchor me, reminding me this morning wasn't a hallucination. I knew I needed answers. I called a trusted family friend and arranged to meet a lawyer. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now that the lawyer was calm, precise, and kind-eyed, the type who listens without flinching, I told her every detail. The market, the jacket, the laugh, the little boy, the pale house, the leaning fence. She didn't judge. She didn't question my sanity. She said something that made my stomach turn. If he staged his death, there will be money somewhere, and money always leaves tracks. She handed me a card for a private investigator. Holding it felt like standing in front of a doorway I had never dared to open. 2 days later, I met him. His eyes were tired, his coat plain, but his patience was unshakable. He asked me to start at the funeral, not the market. And as I recounted that day, all the small details I had buried with my husband, I felt my grief twisting into something sharp, something steady. Money, accounts, transfers. All signs pointed to one impossible truth. My husband had rerouted his life. My mourning had been manipulated. My grief had been used. For the first time in 6 months, I felt clarity. I was no longer a widow surviving her grief. I was a woman preparing to confront a man who had betrayed everything. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, heart hammering, throat dry. He entered, confident, calm, until he saw me. His surprise was faint but unmistakable. I didn't rise. I didn't chase him. I let the silence speak. My lawyer slid the documents across the table, neat, undeniable, and I watched. His hands, the familiar hands I had loved for decades, hovered over the papers as if afraid to touch the truth. I mourned you, I said softly, and you were busy living. For the first time since the funeral, I saw him small, vulnerable, and I understood something that grief had never taught me. It can break you, yes, but it can also sharpen you. And for the first time, I felt awake.